Hello and welcome to the Easter message from One Heart this year. We want to look just at some aspects of the story. In particular, I want to look at the Roman governor that is a key man in the Easter story, and that of course is Pontius Pilate. He was in fact the procurator or the governor of the whole of the province of Judea, Samaria and Idumea, so he's quite a powerful man. And normally someone in this position would do the work for between 1, maybe the most 3 years. But Pontius Pilate actually had this governor's position for 10 years, from AD 26 up to 36. And he was known for using any means to keep law and order. And he was the only one who had full authority, sole authority, to order an execution of somebody. And we know that his wife, we hear a little bit about her in the Gospels, was a worshipper of God and also revered the Jews and respected their laws. Her name, our tradition says, is possibly Procula or Claudia, but we're not really sure of that, because there is other information which supports what the Gospels say, and I've been looking at that, and it's giving us a bit more depth and breadth to what we want to know. So we know that Jesus came before Pilate as he was the governor. The Jewish leaders who didn't want Jesus to live, they wanted him out of the way. They were not able to put him to death or crucify him under the Jewish law. So they had to get it before the only man who could give that order, which is Pilate. And the Jewish leaders themselves were divided, as we know. People like Nicodemus and others were believers in Jesus and would not agree with what was happening. So most of them were against him, and they used blasphemy as the reason, or the main reason, to ask that he be put to death. Now, we're going to look at the Gospel of Matthew mainly, and in chapter 26, verse 63 to 66, it says, I put you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. That's the high priest's question to Jesus. And he answered and said, it is as you said, nevertheless you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven. And that was enough, according to the high priest, saying he has spoken blasphemy. What further do we need of witnesses? You've heard his blasphemy. But of course, they had to go before Pilate, as we know. And in Matthew 27, verse 11, we see Jesus before Pilate, and he's asking him, are you the King of the Jews? And Jesus says, these are your words, as you say, you have spoken it. And Pilate said, well, but why do you not answer me? Why do you not speak anymore? Because there's many things that these Jewish leaders have testified against you. And there's some of these additional things not mentioned in the Gospel I found in these other writings. It says that they accused him or denigrated him as being one born out of wedlock, and that his birth caused the slaying of other children. As we know, in Bethlehem this happened. They held that against him, and they said that his parents fled to Egypt after the birth, and that was a cowardly act and a lack of confidence in who Jesus was. They brought all these things against him. although his supporters, Jesus' supporters among the Jewish leaders, did maintain that Joseph was legally espoused to Mary. But also it's said that Nicodemus and his supporters brought testimonies of healing, or brought people in front of Pilate and in front of the Sanhedrin, those who'd been healed by the touch or the word of Jesus, which apparently, according to these records, includes a man who was lame for 38 years and was healed. But of course the objection coming against these testimonies, one of them was, well, this person was healed on the Sabbath, and that is against the law. And you know that was a continual problem that they brought this up. And the other thing was the woman who had the issue of blood. They said that she was brought forward to testify, and they discounted her because under the law a woman couldn't testify. So they kind of got things their own way. And Pilate asked Jesus, what should he do? Because you're an innocent man. And Jesus apparently answered, do as is given to you to do. In other words, the prophecy that's been made says that I have to be put to death and rise again. So therefore you do what you have to do, because you are part of the fulfillment of this prophecy. So Pilate washes his hands in verse 24 of chapter 27 of Matthew. I am innocent of this man's blood. And this act of washing hands showed that he was innocent. He was not responsible for his death. But the people, many of the people said, let his blood be on us and on our children. Sometimes this is used as a reason for events like the Holocaust. But that is not fair at all, because all of Jesus' disciples were Jews, and he was a Jew himself. And yet we are all responsible for sinning against God, that we need to claim the blood of this man. So his blood is on us, but through his blood we are set free and made innocent. Pilate mentioned the fact that his wife was a believer, respected the Jewish law, but she had this terrible dream which caused her to send message to her husband Pilate to have nothing to do with this man, because I have suffered in this dream. So Pilate brought this fact to the Jewish leaders, and they said, but this Jesus is a sorcerer, and he sent this fabricated dream to your wife so that she would dream it. Well, I don't know. There was always a reason, always an excuse. And Jesus said to Pilate, agreed that he is the king over those, effectively said that over those who know the truth, those who are of the truth, he is their king. And that is stated in a different gospel, the Gospel of John, chapter 18 and verse 37. And in verse 38 is the famous question of Pilate, what is truth? What a question to ask. And he was confronted by the truth in the person of Jesus. But for those who were not of the truth, they had their reasons, and they lived according to a lie. One of those lies is the saying, seeing is believing. And if you look in Matthew 27 again, verse 42, he said, he saved others, himself he cannot save. If he's King of Israel, let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. So they were saying, yeah, if we see this happen, we'll believe. But that's not true. And the next verse, 43, he trusted in God. Let him deliver him now, if he will have him, for he said, I am the Son of God. Even the robbers crucified with him reviled him for that same thing. And in verse 49, when he was on the cross, some said, let him alone, let us see if Elijah will come to save him. Again, another of these lies. And in the previous chapter, 26 and verse 68, when the soldiers were mocking him, and the high priest was mocking him in this case, and the Jewish leaders, that he is deserving of death. They spat on his face and beat him, and others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, prophesy to us, Christ, who is the one who struck you? Again, they were mocking him with this thing, that if we see this, we will believe. They're trying to dictate the reasons for believing. You cannot do that. And it's interesting to see, it's not as though there wasn't any lack of things happening around this time or evidences that God was behind it. There was plenty of drama. If you read again in Matthew 27, verse 51 to 53, it says, behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. That's a very, very significant thing, because the temple was guarding the way, the Holy of Holies, and the priest, the high priest, was the only one who could go in there, and then only once a year, and then after he'd done various rituals. But if this was torn from top to bottom, that's an indication that God is saying, I've made the way open to my presence. And it said there was an earthquake, and rocks were split in two. And this amazing thing, the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised up. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the city and appeared to many. This is many saints appearing to many people. What more do you want? If you want to see something as an evidence, but that was ignored. And in fact, this did cause the belief of the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus. In verse 54, saw the earthquake and the things that had happened. They feared greatly, saying, truly this was the Son of God. So if you wanted some evidence, there it was, and the centurion believed. And then for his resurrection, in verse 65 and 66, it said, Pilate said, you have a guard, go your way, make the grave as secure as you know how. So they went and made the tomb secure, sealing the stone and setting the guard. They did all they could to avoid anything happening in the way of Jesus coming out of the grave or being taken out. And in verse 2 to 4 of the next chapter 28, behold, there was a great earthquake. All right, this was on Easter Day's time, so another earthquake. And an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat on it. I like that. Sat on it saying, look here, he's resurrected, he's risen. His countenance His face was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. And the guards shook for fear of him, and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know you seek Jesus, who was crucified." So isn't that good? Well, there's plenty of drama around his death and resurrection. Plenty of reasons to believe. And chapter 26, going back again, verse 7 to 13. I just want to look at what happened with the women. At that time, women were kind of pushed down, as they are in some cultures even today. And, they wouldn't accept the testimony of the woman who was healed with the issue of blood, just because she was a woman. And yet, Jesus had obviously shown great favour and honour to women. And they'd responded in faith in many ways better than the men had. And in chapter 26, if you go to verse 7 to 13, it says, "A woman came to him with a flask of costly, fragrant oil, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. And when his disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, 'Why this waste? For this fragrant oil might have been sold for much and given to the poor.' But when Jesus was aware of it, he said to them, 'Why you trouble the woman? For she has done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, but me you do not have always. For in pouring this fragrant oil on my body, she did it for my burial.'" There we are. "Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her." And we give a memorial to her right now, as well as to the other women in the story. Because if you look back in chapter 27, verse 55, this was after Jesus was on the cross. It said, "Many women who followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him, were there looking on from afar, among whom were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons," which is the mother of John. So they were there, expectant and watching and ministering where they could, but keeping a safe distance. And in verse 61, after the burial, it said Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary, sitting opposite the tomb. Isn't that wonderful? And beginning of chapter 28, verse 1, "After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn," Easter Sunday, "Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb." An expectation now, wasn't there? And the men weren't anywhere to be seen. And they had their reward, because also in chapter 28, verse 8, it said, "So they went out quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and ran to bring his disciples the word that Jesus had risen." And the risen Jesus had this authority, this power. He said, verse 18, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth." And that's another story. It's the beginning of the mission call to the nations. We could speak about that at another time. But going back to Pilate, As I said, he was governor from 26 to 36 AD. The records show that he died in AD 39, just 3 years later, after finishing as the governor. And there's some disagreement on how he died, but it was something dramatic. Either he went into exile because he'd become a believer and was suffering persecution, and on exile he committed suicide. But the other account says that he was executed himself as a believer and a supporter of the followers of Jesus. I like to think it was the latter, and of course his wife was already a believer, so it seems they may have had a great influence, Pilate and his wife, in the early church. And it's on record that in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church that they recognise Saint Pontius Pilate as somebody special in what they call sainthood. So that's interesting to look at how this man was used to fulfill the prophecies and how he became a believer himself, and how that we can be cleansed in that blood that was shed, the innocent blood which was shed for us and for our salvation and our healing. So give thanks to God. Thank you for listening. Amen.